One of the things you might be worried about is whether or not you're going to get your writing done. Are you going to write enough prose for your classes to complete your assignments on time? Are you a productive enough writer? Right? You probably have many classes and a lot of writing to do, and you're worried about whether or not you will do enough writing throughout the year. The approach I'm going to talk about will definitely help you control that. So that is, it will give you a good sense of how much you can get done, and it will give you confidence in your planning. So that's one of the things I can help you with. The other thing I can help you with is if you feel like you've always written enough, you've always gotten your assignments done, you don't really have a problem. Normally you see word count constraints as a kind of like a limitation, right? It's like a bind. I have all this to say and I don't have enough words to say it in. I don't get enough space, so you may not have the productivity problem. But what you are worried about is whether or not you're going to be appreciated for the good ideas that you have, right? The cheapest way of explaining that point is, of course, you're worried about whether or not you're going to get a good enough grade. And I have to make this very clear that obviously I can't help you become smarter or more knowledgeable directly. You can do that yourself. But there is this worry about whether or not, even if you know everything you need to know, is it getting across in your writing? Right? So are you getting your knowledge and your good ideas across as you write? Do your teachers and your examiners, your censors, do they appreciate it? Right? That's an important thing, and it's not productivity, it's effectiveness. Question of, am I writing effectively? Right? So you might think those are the two things. Why have any, what else could we possibly want? And one thing you will find at university is a lot of people who are very productive writers and very effective writers. They write a lot and they are very famous for their ideas. Some of your teachers are these people. But if you talk to them about writing, you realize how unhappy they are, right? They don't like writing. It's painful to them. They don't enjoy it. It's a chore that they do it well, but it gives them no joy, right? Well, we can fix that too. So it's more productive, more effective, and happier writers. Those three things are the reasons you might be here. If you undertake to work on your writing the way I'm going to try to explain to you, right? An important feature of the thing I'm going to describe to you, which I call it writing process reengineering, which you might have heard of business process reengineering. This is something like that. It's all about just getting a sense of what your goals are and then defining tasks that will let you reach those goals. But it's not just about getting it done. It's also very much about doing it in such a way that every time you write, you will become better at writing, right? So there's lots of things that we've figured out how to get it done, but while we're doing it, we don't improve. And so this is a way of getting things done while at the same time improving your ability to do that thing in the future, right? Come on. So I got an email just today, actually, just somebody who wanted to make absolutely sure that this was not just any old writing, but it was academic writing. And this is very much what it is. It is about academic writing. It's not writing in general. But I do want to say that if you know how to write well academically, right, if you can write good scholarly prose, you have a general skill. Right? This is a skill that not just your teachers will value. This is something that your future employers will value you for having as well. So, I mean, it's something that, don't just learn it for school, learn it in general. But I'm going to talk specifically about academic writing. And so I have to define that. I have to try to tell you what academic writing is, what distinguishes it from other kinds of writing, like letter writing, business plan writing, memo writing, writing emails, a blog post, newspaper articles, and this kind of thing. The first definition, which is a general definition of academic writing that I'm going to suggest to you, is that academic writing is the art of writing down what you know for the purpose of discussing it with other knowledgeable people, right? So it's not just writing we do in school for the purpose of getting a good grade. It's writing that we do to open the things that we think and believe to criticism from other people who are qualified to criticize us, right? Qualified to engage us in a discussion about the things that we know something about. And these other knowledgeable people are important to keep in mind who they are, because there's a temptation in school to think you're always writing for your teachers, right? You are writing for your examiners, the people that are going to give you your grade. And please remember that if you do that, you are writing to a writer that is making the task too easy for you. Right? You might think it makes it harder to write to a really, really, really smart and really knowledgeable person, right? Like your teacher. But really what it does is it makes it too easy for you, because you are letting the reader do all the work for you. Right? You're going to use a concept and you're going to assume the reader understands it better than me. Right? You're going to tell a story, you're going to assume the reader knows more about this part of history than I do. Right? You're going to summarize a theory, but you're going to assume that the reader actually understands this theory perfectly well, right? And will contribute everything that I'm missing. So don't do that. Imagine a reader who is your intellectual equal, somebody who knows as much about the subject matter as you do. And the best way to imagine that person is to imagine somebody in your class, somebody who is studying the same thing at the same level that you're studying, somebody who's going to be taking the same exam, somebody who is writing the same assignment. Now, that marks a pretty big range, right? So what I would suggest is that you imagine the brightest, the most serious student in your class, right? And write for them. Somebody who's probably read all the required reading for the class, somebody who has participated in the discussions you've had in class, right? Somebody who is probably themselves going to get a good grade on the assignment you're writing. But imagine presenting your ideas to them, because you have access to what they know, because you know what they've read and you know what they've thought about and you know sort of what level that they're at. So try presenting your ideas to them. Those are the other knowledgeable people. And then remember that these are people whose opinions you would respect. So if you say something and they say, yeah, I don't think that's right, I don't think that's the right way to read Karl Weick or something, right? Then you say, oh, okay, well, let me hear, what do you think? Because whatever you think, you may also be wrong, I may be wrong, right? But it's going to be a nice conversation. We'll have a discussion about this and we'll both get smarter. So it's that kind of reader that you want to be thinking about when you're writing. Does that make sense? All right. So you'll have noticed that I've put knowledge on both sides of that definition. So you're writing down something you know, not just something you're thinking about, something you imagine or something you want, right? But something you know, and you're writing it for somebody else who knows something about the subject, right? And that means that I have to define what knowledge is in order for this definition to work. And I'm going to do that very quickly. I'll give you 3 definitions. One of them is philosophical, one of them is literary, the last one is literary, and one of them is rhetorical. So you have a kind of a mental explanation, a cognitive explanation of what knowledge is. Then we'll have a more sort of communicative one, right? One about conversation. And then we'll have another definition that's about what goes down on the page, right? What's actually about writing. And it's important to keep all 3 in mind, because it really, if you just forget about the first 2 and just think, what is knowledge in relation to writing, then it will affect your style. Your writing will become very flat. You need your writing to express a much deeper competence than just the ability to write what's in your books. Right? You need it to express something much deeper. And so I'm going to encourage you to think of your knowledge, your knowing, as a competence, as an ability, something you can do. Right? The first thing you'll be able to do if you know something is to make up your mind. If you're knowledgeable in a subject area, then if we give you some materials of relevance to that subject area, if we throw you into a situation where you'll have some experiences that are relevant to that subject area, then you'll be able to make up your mind about what's going on. But of course, we all know that knowledge isn't just making up your mind. It's not just having a belief about something. I hope you've all had this experience that you made up your mind about something, you came to believe something, you had an opinion, and then a week goes by and you discover by experience that you were wrong, right? That it was just not true what you thought was true, right? Have you all had this experience? If you haven't had this experience, you will have it many times coming up, because that is what getting an education is all about, is forming beliefs and then discovering they were untrue. We'll talk a little bit about that in relation to writing as well. So a philosopher will always be careful to say it's not just your beliefs that count, it's your true beliefs. Right? It's beliefs that have this character that we call truth, and this is the one I'm assuming you've discovered just by discovering that things are untrue sometimes. Right? So you know what the difference is between a true belief and a false belief. Right? Now, you might think that's good enough. Right? Let's just be able to make up our minds and have form true beliefs quickly and efficiently. Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that? Right? Wouldn't that be knowledge? And the answer to that is no, we need to add another component to it. And the example I like to use is you may have like some of us in the room do, have a fundamental distrust of bearded men. We speak from experience. We know that if you have a beard, you're trying to hide something. So you may have gone through life and discovered that bearded men are not to be trusted. Right? Now, if you meet me, for example, and you undertake not to trust me about some matter, right, this may turn out to be true, right? You may be right that I can't be trusted, right? But I think we'll all admit that there's something wrong with this way of making up your mind about people. What do we call the mistake I'm making if I say, oh, you have a beard, so I'm not going to trust you? Right? What is that mistake? What does it sound like? Does it sound like a good way of deciding who to trust? What is it? What is it?
Prejudice.
It's a prejudice, exactly, right? Somebody said a prejudgment, which is kind of the same thing, but a prejudice is actually the pejorative we like to use for this, right? So we make up our minds actually in advance based on not a very good argument, right? So if I say I don't trust him, and you ask me why, and I say, well, because he has a beard, you'll say, well, I don't think that's a very good strategy. So what philosophers will say is you have to have a good reason to believe as well. So you have to believe something has to be true, and you have to have a good reason to believe it, right? And then you might say, well, now we have everything we need to have knowledge. And this is where we have to get away from philosophy, because we don't want knowledge just to be the state of mind. We don't want knowledge just to be the ability to get yourself into a made-up state of mind where you believe that you have a good idea, right? There's a movie called The One and Only, I think is the English translation. Den Eneste Ene is the Danish title. If you haven't seen it, it can be recommended. It's a love story. It's a romantic comedy. There's a psychologist in this movie who has studied psychology for 7 years. She's very smart. She has a lot of opinions about how relationships work. She has a bit of a problem explaining to others how to have good relationships. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to learn this lesson, not just to be able to make up your mind, but to be able to hold your own in a conversation with other knowledgeable people. This is the second definition of knowledge. You're able to form a justified true belief, right? And you're also able to hold your own in a conversation with other knowledgeable people. And again, don't let there be a mystery about who they are, because they're each other, right? They're the other people in your cohort, we're taking the same courses, studying the same things, interested in the same subjects. Learn how to talk to them. And just like we can ask 3 things about your state of mind, do you believe it? Is it true? Do you have a justification to believe it? Do you have a good reason to believe it? We can ask 3 things about your ability to converse. There's probably lots more conversational competencies that you'll learn about in your communication courses. But I'm going to give you 3 things that are important to keep in mind as things you should be able to do if you know something about something in conversation. Right? What marks you as a knowledgeable person in conversation? Have you all been told at some point in your schooling that there's no such thing as a stupid question? Have you all discovered that it's a lie? Right? There is very definitely such a thing as a stupid question. You are the ones asking it sometimes, and you are also very often the ones hearing the stupid question. You recognize it immediately, and you realize it's because it doesn't come from any knowledge that the questioner has. It comes from the ignorance of the questioner, right? So if you're part of a knowledge community, if you're part of a group of knowledgeable people, then there is such a thing as a stupid question. And part of being knowledgeable is having the ability to form a good question, to state a good question, recognize it, and answer it, right? To deliver the correct response to what is a recognized good question within the conversation, within the discourse, we would sometimes say, right? If you can do that, you have a very useful skill. And it's something that you work deliberately with in many of our programs, pretty much all of our programs here at CBS, when you do your problem formulation or your research question and this kind of thing, right? Really, what is a good question? Given everything we know, what's a good question, right? But that's not all. There's other things that you need in conversation. A second thing you need is a sense of humor. You need a shared sense of humor. You need to find roughly the same things funny that the people you're talking to find funny. And again, the boundary to the absurd goes where your knowledge kind of stops, right? So you share a bunch of knowledge. This makes certain things funny. Certain jokes become funny. Certain things to say become funny that wouldn't be funny if you didn't know. And again, there's a good example from popular culture. Have you seen this series called The Big Bang Theory? And it's about physicists. They have a lot of jokes, inside humor about quarks and protons and stuff, but you have to know the speed of light in order to get the joke. And that kind of shared knowledge that makes a joke possible is one of the things you're learning as you go along. And some of you won't even notice it, but it's worth paying attention to, that you become specifically funny in specific situations. Keep that in mind, it's good for your style. You can use it when you're writing as well. Not that you have to write jokes all the time, but you can use that sense of humor to get through your writing as well. And then there's a last thing. This is very important in this age of political outrage, this age of Trumpism and great concern about what people say, political correctness, and so forth. You have to know where the boundary of offense goes in a conversation. What will make people angry if you say it, right? And you might think, and it's reasonable to think so, that you need to know where this boundary of offense goes in a conversation because you want to avoid it, because you don't want to make people angry, right? But I'm going to encourage you to take a different approach. And again, I will take my cue from culture. Do you know this Swedish heroine called Rania, the daughter of the thief, right? Rania, right? She is told, she's a very brave young woman, she's told that she should be very careful by the river. And she should be very careful by the gap of doom, the gap of doom or something, right? There's this place very dangerous place. She should be very careful there. So what does she do? Does she stay away from it? No. She goes right down to the edge of the river and takes great care there. Right? She goes right up to the edge of the gap of doom, and she takes great care there. She practices care, right? This is an important thing to learn, right? To have that courage to go up to the boundary of offense, sometimes even to cross it, to learn how to manage that space as well, right? And the important thing here isn't not to offend people. It's if you're going to offend somebody, do it on purpose, right? Just like if you make somebody laugh, you should do it on purpose. The reason that because provocations are okay, right? It's okay to say, I'm going to say something. I know you will find this provocative. I know this is going to push your buttons, right? I'm going to say it anyway because I need the conversation to go through this space, right? And if we learn how to handle that part of a conversation, then we're getting a real skill, right? If we're constantly afraid of that part of the conversation, then parts of the conversation on the safe side of the river, well back from the gap, will also be weaker. Our style will be weaker there as well. So I'm going to encourage you to experiment with it, right? At your own risk, of course, right? I can't help you if you cause real deep problems. So be careful, but do it, right? Learn how style works and learn how provocation works. You'll find that if somebody can see the twinkle in your eye, can see that you're doing it on purpose, that it's much easier to take the offense and to deal with it in conversation. Right? So really do be brave. Great, so we are out of the head. We have the ability to make up our minds, but we're not satisfied with that. We have the ability to converse, but we're also not going to be satisfied with that. I'm sure you know a lot of people who have made up their minds about a great many things and who are really good at talking about those things that they've made up their minds about. We want to add a third component, the literary component, which is the one you're here to hear about today. And it is probably the most practical thing I'm going to tell you tonight. It may be the most practical thing you will hear at university ever. So listen up. I'm going to define the competence of knowing in relation to writing, and it will bring all these things together. But I want to say you need all three, right? So the two we've already talked about, and now this third literary component. If you know something, if you're knowledgeable, if you have knowledge, you have the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it. And you may ask, what is a prose paragraph? And I will tell you exactly what a prose paragraph is for my purposes. And this is exactly the thing that I can help you become better at making, right? So if you're trying to make this thing that I'm going to describe to you now, and you come to me with your attempt to make this thing, then I can help you do it better, right? Because I know how to make these. I know very well how to make them. Here's the definition. A paragraph is at least 6 sentences long, at most 200 words. It says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it. It's about half a page, and you recognize in all the reading you do usually has a tab indent at the beginning and a new line. Fills about half a page, a nice block of prose. Ideally, it will always say one thing, and then it will support, elaborate, or defend it, right? And how you decide whether or not it's going to support, elaborate, or defend is quite simple, actually. If you know what you're going to say, and we'll talk about how to get better at that. If you know what you're going to say, there's a question of how you're going to say it. And Virginia Woolf, the early 20th century novelist, had a very good way of putting this. She said, knowing who you're writing for is knowing how to write. Right? So if you're ever worried, how am I going to write this? Just ask, who am I writing for? And then again, remind yourself, I'm not writing for my teachers. I'm writing for other people who are as knowledgeable about this subject as I am, which is to say my fellow students, the best and the brightest and the most serious among them. Right? Those are the people I'm writing for. So I have to ask myself, this person that I'm writing for, this fellow student, all right, at the top of their game, at their most serious, if I want to say this thing to them, this one thing in this paragraph, if I want to say this thing to them, what will they find hard about this? What will they find difficult about it? What difficulty does this idea present for them? And there's 3 kinds of difficulty, right? And they're equally common in academic writing, so you need to train your ability to handle all 3 of them. And they can also sometimes turn up in combination, but let's just take them one at a time. The first difficulty is the reader might find what you're trying to say hard to believe. Right? It's a classic thing. You say something, it's a little bit strange sounding, and it's going to need some evidence. Right? So the problem for the reader is, I'm going to find it hard to believe. The solution which the writer provides is evidence. Right? So you're going to provide supporting information that will make the reader able to believe this. Right? So that's one very common difficulty the reader faces. Just as common is the second difficulty, which is that the reader will find it hard to understand. So you're going to say something, and the reader's difficulty, remember, this is somebody at your level, studying in the same class. This person will find it hard to understand. And it could be that the person will just not know what you're talking about. Right? Maybe you've got a case company, right? That produces some product that you're going to assume the reader doesn't know about. So you're going to have to explain this process that the company is engaged in, right? Or you're going to take a managerial practice that you haven't had in class, and you're going to apply some theory of creativity to it, whatever it is that you're going to do, right? So you're going to take a theory that the reader does understand and apply it to something they don't understand. And so you have to explain what you're talking about. So you take that as a possible solution. So you're elaborating, right? You're going to define terms, explain a little bit about what you mean. You're going to tell the reader what you mean. There are cases where you will say, okay, well, if I'm writing to somebody who's at my level, and in fact taking the course maybe even more seriously than I take it myself, then surely they're not going to have a problem understanding Weick's theory of sense making, right? So that's not going to be my problem when I say something like sense making is a retrospective process. But you have to remember that your reader is knowledgeable enough also to know that as soon as you've said sense making is a retrospective process, right, then you have to be more precise, right? It raises a bunch of questions. Retrospective in regards to what, right? So now you have to define some other terms or parameters because that's what the reader expects of you, right? As soon as you've said sense making, you have to say image formation, for example, or something like that, right? So the reader's still just trying to understand what you're saying, but the reader has some very specific questions, and you know what those questions are because of the class discussions you've had and because of the reading you've done, right? Which you share with the reader. So those are two main things. The reader will find it hard to believe, provide evidence. The reader will find it hard to understand, make precise what you mean, explain your terms, and so forth, right? But then there's a third thing that the reader might find it hard to do, and that is to agree with you, right? You might say, I have this opinion, I formed this belief, I think it's true, right? And I'm going to say it, but I know from the class discussions and from talking to my fellow students that not everybody shares this view, right? Not everybody thinks that this is the right way to read this book. Not everybody thinks that this was the right thing for Steve Jobs to do when he was developing the iPhone, right? There are contrary opinions to mine among my readers. And so what I might decide is my reader's going to have a hard time agreeing with me on this, and I'm going to engage with those objections. And it's a very interesting rhetorical situation to be in as a writer, because often what will happen is you're trying to put together an argument, and you'll get to this thing you want to say, and you realize, okay, now I've got this disagreement. I'm probably not even going to persuade my reader that I'm right. So it's not like my reader's going to come to believe what I believe. What I need to do is write a paragraph that manages this disagreement, right? That takes this disagreement and somehow positions it in my argument so it's okay that the reader disagrees with me on this point. I acknowledge the disagreement, but I can still move on from there. So those are you can see that those are three very different things that you might be doing in a paragraph. Winning the reader's belief, right? Explaining something, getting the reader to understand, and then just managing a disagreement. Perhaps convincing them, but certainly managing the disagreement. Does that make sense? Three things a paragraph can do. It's at least 6 sentences and most 200 words. It always says one thing, and that one thing you express in a key sentence. So one of the sentences in a paragraph, and remember you've got at least 6 of them, but not just 6, so you can have 8 or 9 sentences. One of them will express this idea, and the rest of them will do this work of supporting, elaborating, or defending it. And so if that's what you're doing in a paragraph, then you're trying to do the right thing. And then we can talk about whether or not you can do it better, right? Now, you're all knowledgeable people. The great privilege of working at a university is that you're always working with knowledgeable, intelligent people. You've been screened for that purpose, right? Which is very nice. So I could get you all to write down 3 sentences that you know to be true. So you have justified true beliefs, that's what they express. You could have interesting conversations about these ideas in these sentences, right? And I've just said that you could probably write a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and most 200 words about it. Yeah? Now suppose in a couple of weeks you come to me with 3 paragraphs that support, elaborate, or defend each of these things in nice coherent paragraphs of at least 6 sentences and most 200 words. Would that prove that sitting here today in this room you knew those 3 things? You write 3 sentences down now. In 2 weeks you show me 3 paragraphs. They're perfectly coherent, right? Very nicely written. Does that prove that as you sit here today, you knew those 3 things? I think you all suspect it's a rhetorical question. The answer is no, yeah? Do you know why? What does it prove? It proves that if I give you 2 weeks and a reasonably good reason to do so, you could learn those 3 things, right? And for most people at university, I could sit down with their teachers and we could define hundreds of sentences that if you don't already know they're true, if we give you 2 weeks and a good reason, right, you could learn them, right? So that's all it proves. All it proves is here are 3 things that you're confident you could learn. So the only way to make this a test of whether or not you actually know something, right now, is to put an interesting time limit on the ability to compose that coherent prose paragraph, right? We have to define a time limit. And so this is going to be the most important thing I'm going to tell you. Right? The ability to know something, right? Being knowledgeable, is the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it in 27 minutes. 27 minutes. The thing I can tell you is that if you develop that skill, right, so that for everything you learn at school from now on, you also develop the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it in 27 minutes, you will not regret having that ability, right? This is an ability you want to have. It's nice to know you can do it. If I know it, I can write the corresponding paragraph. I can define a key sentence, right? I can say one nice declarative thing, and I'll talk a little bit about that, right? And then I can decide whether or not the reader needs support, elaboration, or defense. And I can give me 27 minutes and I can compose that paragraph, right? That's a nice thing to know to be able to do. And of course, this is where everything like time management comes in, right? If you know you can write every paragraph and it's going to be at most 200 words in 27 minutes, you start having a sense of how long it's going to take you to write a 5-page assignment, 10-page, or a 50-page project, right? You start being able to control that process. It's very important to keep that in mind. Does that make sense? How are you going to become good at writing coherent prose paragraphs in 27 minutes? You might practice. That's a great idea. That is exactly the right answer, right? Just like anything else, if you wanted to become good at playing the piano, you would sit down every day and you would play the piano. If you wanted to become good at yoga, you would sit down and do some yoga every day, right? This would improve your ability to do these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a training model for how to write paragraphs and how to constantly become better at it. And it requires some structure, but like I say, if you develop this structure, if you manage this discipline, if you understand the importance of this and work with it, not continuously, but work with this, then you will become better writers. So here's what you do. First of all, never start on a blank page. You've heard this before, right? You should never start on a blank page, so we need some way of avoiding that. There's a general principle that I'm going to do to illustrate for any planning problem, not even writing, is you should never start with a blank page. You should always do something to that page before you start. And a simple thing is just say, look at this. It's white. It's anxiety embodied in nothingness. Right? It is that anything could happen, right? So don't let it be like that. Just change that immediately by carving it up. And you can carve it up horizontally or vertically, however you like. Horizontally or vertically, however you like. You don't have to worry too much about it as long as you give it some structure, because now it can be a beginning and an end, it can be a before and an after, it can be whatever. In this case, it's going to be one day and the next. So let's be realistic, Tuesday, Wednesday. Right? So we've got one day, we've got the next day, and then what I want to suggest to you is that at some point in every day, the day comes to an end. Right? Now, you should make sure that it comes to an end well before you put your head on the pillow and go to sleep. Right? That's way too late for your day to end. Your day should end probably, sometime around the evening, preferably before dinner. And what you want to say is, at this point, I'm not going to get any smarter. I'm going to form no new justified true beliefs. I will not become a better conversationalist from now on. I'm going to gain no new knowledge, right? At that point, you take 5 minutes, no more, maybe 10 at the beginning, but try to get this down to 5 minutes as quickly as you can, right? You take 5 minutes and you write down one sentence, right? The internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. Sense-making is a retrospective process of image formation, right? Communication is vitally important for business operations in multicultural contexts, right? Whatever it is you've learned, right? In your studies, something from your program, things that you know to be true because you've studied the matter, you've had conversations about it, right? These are things you know to be true, right? If it takes more than 5 or 10 minutes to do it, you've given yourself a research project, right? That's not, you're just making a decision. I'm trying to pick one thing I know. And at the same time, you decide, first thing tomorrow morning, whatever that is, let's say 8 to 8:27, I'm going to take 27 minutes, and I'm going to compose a coherent prose paragraph that says this thing in at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words. I'm going to spend those 27 minutes becoming better at that. Right? There are some people who immediately say, this is a great idea. What I can do is I can take something I learned today and decide to write about that, and then I've got a kind of a way of keeping notes or like storing the information, the learning from the day. There's a lot of reasons not to do it that way. First of all, you learn much more than just one thing a day, right? So that this is not going to work for all of it. So you need some other way of constantly being, keeping good notes and storing it in your array, right? So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that about half of the things you think you learned today are false, right? You form beliefs, but they will turn out to be untrue upon closer consideration and conversation with your peers. So tomorrow you'll discover that it's false after you just spent 27 minutes writing it down, right? So it's completely useless to you as a storage device. It's about 50-50 hit or miss, right? The way you increase the hit rate, and so that you're actually training your ability to write something you know, which is to say you're actually writing down justified true beliefs, right? Justified true beliefs, right? Is that you remember that there's a weekend that has passed, and you remember that even the week before, you were not a complete ignoramus, right? You knew things already last week. Pick one of those things. Pick something you knew already last week, right, that you had no trouble knowing last week. And that's the thing you're going to write about tomorrow, right? The reason you want to do it this way is that it takes the problem of knowing out of the equation when you're working on your writing. Right? If you want to become a better writer, don't give yourself the problem of knowing it tomorrow. Give yourself the problem of writing it down. Right? That's what you want to be able to do. So you want to identify something that was not knowledge-wise a problem last week. It's still something you know today, and you're going to write about it tomorrow. Does that make sense? Every time you do that, every time you do it this way, you'll become a better writer. You'll get a better sense of the problem of writing, and you will take a step towards mastering it. Right? What we can do then, as your coaches, teachers, and so forth, is we can look at the result of this. Right? And knowing that you picked something yesterday you were going to say, and then you tried to say it, we can say, all right, well, let's see how you can do this better. Let's see how this could be said better. Right? And we're not going to judge whether or not it's true. We're not going to judge whether or not it's smart. What we're going to do is judge whether or not it's well written. Right? Is it clearly written? If you are wrong about this, is this a good way of engaging you in discussion about it? Does this give us an opening to discuss it? Right? That's the question. The question is not, are you right? And you're doing this mainly for practice. There are several things that can go wrong, right? So one of them is quite simple. You make the decision, and then you get up in the morning, and you realize that it's your mother's birthday. And you have promised either to, she may be living in the same residence, or you have promised to go over there with some buns for breakfast with your lovely brother, who has decided that you're going to have a little party for your mom in the morning, as is the custom here. Yes? So you get up and you realize, wait a minute, I can't write at 8 o'clock because I have this date that I have to go on. All right. Now, that is just bad planning, right? And that is the reason that you didn't write, and it's good to be very clear about that. Another thing that can happen is that you get up in the morning and everything's just fine, except you don't feel like it. Right? You don't feel like writing. I'm sure you've had this feeling, right? It's a very familiar feeling of not wanting to write. So 8 o'clock rolls around, and you decide that you'd probably rather surf the internet with your cup of coffee, read the morning news, which is, of course, very important because so many important things are happening in the world, right? So you convince yourself that there's more important things to do that are also a little more pleasant, right? What do we call that? Lack of discipline, right? So it can be bad planning, or it can be lack of discipline, or we can put this maybe a little more colloquially. We could say that it could be stupidity the day before, or just laziness the day of, right? You either be stupid or lazy. These are things that get in the way of your writing. Now that may sound a little bit harsh, but one thing I've found with authors is they have no problem explaining why they're not writing, saying really mean and nasty things about themselves. They'll say, oh, I'm so stupid, or oh, I'm so lazy, that's why I don't get anything done, right? They'll say these things, but they'll only say them, I've found, if they're not true. So if they were stupid, they will gladly admit they were lazy, and if they were lazy, they will gladly admit they were stupid. What I'm going to encourage you to do as a matter of working on your discipline is just to be honest with yourself at least, right? If it was indeed laziness that made you not write in the morning, right, then admit that to yourself. Get on with your day, but admit it to yourself, right? If it was indeed stupid planning the day before, then admit that to yourself, right? Just be honest. If you are working, as I suggest, you will not try to make up the lack of writing later the same day. At exactly 8:27, no matter how well it went, the burden has been lifted from your shoulders. You don't have to write it later today. You're not even allowed to. Don't carry it with you, right? Don't say, oh, I didn't get it written, but I'll find some time later maybe to write it. Don't do that. Write it or don't write it, right? As Yoda says, there is no try. Do or do not, right? But if the moment passes, don't expect yourself to regain it some other time, right? Because the part of you that writes, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, the part of you that writes just needs to know that that's what's going to happen or not happen, right? And you don't want to keep that part of you all stressed out for the rest of the day. And of course, then there's a really exciting thing that can happen, which is you pick something you know the day before. You certainly thought you knew it, and then the next day you get up, and you're very disciplined, and you've had a very good plan, so your morning is free and open, and you are sprightly, and you're sitting down at the computer. The first thing, of course, you do is you start with activity, so you type this sentence, right? You type it, put a period, and then what happens? Your mind recognizes that it is completely blank, and that you don't know what you're talking about. And so at this point, you do something very simple. Most people will do this. Oh, I'm so dumb. I'm an idiot, right? But what I encourage you to do, though I don't believe in power opposing, because the science apparently is not very good on this, what I encourage you to do is to do this. This is something that a composer named a director named Benjamin Zander has suggested you do. You go, interesting, ignorance. And now you spend 27 minutes in the company of your ignorance, right? It is an important experience. If you want to become a good writer of what you know, you have to become familiar with your ignorance, right? You have to be willing to sit there for 27 minutes working through that ignorance, becoming comfortable with it. It's kind of like, it bears similarity to this problem of dealing with provocation and offense, right? It's something you don't want to be afraid of. You don't want to be ignoring it, right? You want to move into it, spend time with it. And of course, what will happen is the more time you spend here with your ignorance, the less often you will pick something you don't know what you're talking about, right? Another thing you can do without my help is you can give a paragraph you've written like this. So you write this paragraph and you have a meeting with your friend at 1 o'clock, say, until 10 minutes later. You make a 10-minute appointment with a friend. And you give them this paragraph that you've written. And remember, it's no longer than 200 words. It's going to take about a minute to read. You give it to them and you have them read it out loud to you. This is a fantastic experience, right? It tells you exactly how well the words come off the page to a reader that has never read this before, right? It tells you exactly how the experience of reading is experienced by the reader. So they spend a minute or two reading it out loud, carefully and slowly, right? And then they have the remainder of 9 minutes here, so until 13:09. to tell you whatever they want about this paragraph. Whatever thoughts occurred to them, whether or not they thought it was well written, badly written, what they thought was a good sentence, what they thought was a bad sentence, where they got confused, where they disagree with you, where they think your evidence is bad, where they think your evidence is great, why they think this is interesting, what it made them think about doing in their own writing, and so forth. But they have exactly, all together, including the reading, 9 minutes. After 9 minutes, you take a 1-minute break, and you sit there in silence. And then you stop and you go your separate ways, right? Don't small talk, don't do anything else. This is the only thing you were supposed to do, right? Because if it becomes a bigger thing than that, then all kinds of weird psychological things come into play. All you want to do is have this experience of having somebody else engage with your paragraph immediately, right? So you do, this will also make you better. This will give you all kinds of input. Remember, you didn't say a word, right? You spent all your time saying it here in writing, and then you just took feedback from somebody else. It is possible, just like it is possible to show up and not know anything, it is possible that you end up in a situation where your reader can't think of anything to say. They read it out loud, they tell you what they think the key sentence is, and then they just sit there. Then sit there for 7 minutes, or whatever it is, in silence, experiencing the fact that what you had written didn't occasion any thought whatsoever in the mind of your reader. Remember, you picked somebody who, is a possible reader, a peer, somebody that you study with. Right? Does this make sense? Right? This experience is an important one. Right? Give that experience to yourself, give that experience to each other once in a while. I will tell you a little story that is also kind of a morality tale. It has a moral, and it's all about how to make this work in practice and why it's important and why you'll get something out of it. It's a love story. Two young people, they're very much in love. They have the kind of love that makes them better people, right? So that when they're together, he makes her a better person, she makes him a better person. They know it, their friends know it. It's a great story. Their parents on both sides of the family know this as well. Everybody agrees these two people should be together. The problem that drives the story is that he has a problem keeping his appointments. So they make a date to meet under the tree. They make a date to meet by the river. And they make a date to meet in the cafe. He completely forgets to meet the date under the tree. And this is doubly sad because as she's standing there waiting for him, it begins to rain. And if he had been there, they would have been standing together under the tree with the rain falling off the leaves, and it would have been very romantic. It would have brought them closer together. But he forgot to show up completely, and so she just stood there getting cold and angry, as one would. He hears the story and it moves him very deeply, and so he makes an effort to meet her by the river. And he arrives a few hours after she has left. You might say this is better, right? But it's still not much of a date. It only gives him the opportunity to sit down by the shore of the river and watch the waters go by. And so he's not an idiot. He understands this is a symbol in a story that I'm in. These waters rushing by here must mean something. And he makes an extra special effort to get to the cafe at exactly the moment that she has decided that this will never work. Right? So she has decided to break up with him. She's checked her phone one last time. There's no messages from him. She's put the phone in the handbag. She's getting up from the table, and he storms into the cafe. Now, you have to remember that this is a very deep and profound love they have for each other. And so at that moment, even though she has decided to break up with him and this will never work, she has a moment of doubt. You would too, at this point, doubt whether or not this is a good decision. But then she realizes, of course, as soon as that she feels that doubt, she realizes, if I let this go, if I sit down now and have this date, nothing will ever change. So she steels herself against the pain. A tear begins to form. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't have to. She just walks past him into the street. He feels a great wave of loss, sadness wash over him. Feels weak in the knees and stumbles a little. Fortunately, there's a bar. And so you can sit down at the bar and begin what it's a very beautiful word. In Denmark we call it a grieving process, kærestessorg, right? It's this acknowledgement of loss. He has a good bartender to talk to, of course, so he can process this experience, right? And the bartender very quickly is able to identify the problem. He says, you know what, I think your problem, young man, is that you are not very good at keeping your promises, it seems. And so he says, that's exactly right. I'm not good at keeping my promises. I have been promising to fix her bike for weeks, and I have not gone over there and done it. I will go over there right now and fix her bike. The bartender, being a smart man, says, I don't think you're in any condition to fix a bike right now, and it would be much better if you waited until tomorrow, gave her a call, and said, on Saturday at 2 o'clock, I'm going to come and fix your bike. And then, of course, you have to get over there on Saturday at 2 o'clock and fix that bike, or this will not work. So do that. She will be surprised. She may even be happy. She may even invite you inside. At this point, it is very important that you do the following. You say, no, no, it was just the bike. And then you get on with your day. And she gets on with her day. And there's no further interruptions or confusions. If you want to do something romantic for her, don't just send her flowers. Call her and tell her on Wednesday at 4 o'clock I will come by with some flowers. And she will say, yeah, whatever. And then you will show up at exactly 4 o'clock with those flowers. And she may be surprised and she may be happy to see you and she may invite you inside for a cup of coffee and you will say, no, no, it was just the flowers. Call me if you want to do something. And then you are on your way. Now, why is it he says this? He says this because there's nothing wrong with the romance. There's nothing wrong with the love. It's a good and true love. Everything is fine. What she needs to do is learn to trust him. And of course, there's something I've left out of this story because I wanted you to like him. It's not just that he doesn't arrive at the dates that they've planned. He has a tendency at 4 in the morning, having had maybe a little bit too much to drink with the buddies, to call her up and say, hey, what are you doing? Right? Which is inconvenient and dysfunctional in most relationships, and I don't recommend it. What she has to do is learn to trust that when he has made an appointment, when he's made a date, he's there for that date, he's paying attention at that time. And what I'm trying to say is, there is a part of you that you want to have this relationship with. There's a part of you that wants to become a better writer. And that part of you needs to trust that when you've made a decision the day before, that tomorrow we're going to try to say this, I'm going to spend 27 minutes trying to say it, that's exactly what's going to happen at exactly the time you said it would. And when it's over, at 27 minutes later, it's over. You take a 3-minute break and you get on with your day. Right? There will be times during school when if that relationship is working, right, nothing can make you unhappy. Right? And there will be times when if that relationship is not working, that nothing can make you happy. Right? So you really need to make sure that this relationship is working when it's not needed, right? That you're training it. You're practicing it, right? You're developing a confidence in yourself as a writer. And you do that by sitting down at all times of the semester and practicing this art, right? And if you're doing that, we can help, right? And we can help you work on it so that you actually become more and more and more effective.